Okay.
Yeah, I'll type in there. Okay, it's preparing to live stream. And once it starts, then I'll give them the link.
Okay.
Oh, it's live.
$6.59.
Okay.
$7 o'clock.
Time to go.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Don Weed from the municipality of Rhineland, or Rhineland Municipality, and this is a special evening where we take a look at our zoning bylaws. Zoning bylaws have to be reviewed periodically, and we haven't done it for a while. And we certainly haven't done it since Gretna and Doncooley joined the municipality. And then also because we're in planning region with Altona, it also is imperative that we look at zoning bylaws and try to make them as parallel as possible. So our ultimate goal is to create a consistent set of bylaws that will streamline the development process. Things change and we need to accommodate those changes. So this is an opportunity to share our new draft with you, and so that you can see what council is considering. And to take us forward, I'd just like to introduce a team of people that have worked pretty hard on this. Susan Stein from Community Development Office here, Mike Rempel, our CEO, and Jeff Palmer, who is our planning consultant. You've done all this work, and we now are going to share it with the people that are online here with us. So take it away.
Over to me. All right. Thanks very much for arranging this evening, Susan, and bringing greetings, Don. My name is Jeff Palmer. I'm a city planner with Urban Systems in Winnipeg. We're a small office of about 8 city planners, and we do work around the province on zoning bylaws and active transportation and all sorts of community planning initiatives. So I'll share my screen here. How does that look, Susan?
I'm just going to unshare mine. There we go. Very good.
Great. Okay, so we have a brief presentation tonight. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why it's important to do this, why this is good planning, what the purpose of the exercise is, and highlight some of the key changes. So this should probably take about 30 to 45 minutes tonight, and at the end we'll have time for lots of questions. And you can throw the softballs to me, and if you have anything more complicated, please ask Reeve Don Weeb. Just kidding, Don. There we go. Okay, if there's any questions tonight as well, you can ask them in the live chat that's beside or below the video, and Susan will pass it along to the panel. And keep in mind, you have to be logged into Google for that for the questions to work. If that doesn't work, or if you have any questions that you would like to ask at a later date, you can ask them by phone or email after the presentation. The contact information will be at the end of the presentation. and we'll be good to go. The presentation will be hosted on the Arm of Rhineland's website, as well as all the maps that are necessary. So the purpose of the presentation is to provide background on the process, highlight some key changes, and talk about the next steps going forward. So just a little bit of background. As Dawn mentioned, the planning district was established in 2010, and planning districts are great tools to enable cooperation in communities that are adjacent. The RPGA development plan was approved a couple of years later in October 2012, and then zoning bylaws followed not too long after that. So Altona was first approved in 2013 and received third reading back in April of this year. We had the open house for the virtual open house in Altona back in January of this year. So the intent of the project is that the new bylaw for Rhineland is going to consolidate the zoning bylaws of Gretna, that dates from 2015, and Plum Coulee and Rhineland, both from 2013. So it's just going to make it a little bit easier for everyone to administer. So the goals are to produce a new zoning bylaw for Rhineland and one for Altona, harmonized where possible. We're using the new provincial municipal planning guide for zoning bylaws in Manitoba because it uses clear, plain language and standard definitions. It's used across the province, so it makes it easy for developers, for citizens, for administrators, because it uses consistent language and consistent terms across the province. We're going to go through past amendments, conditional uses and variances, and make some recommendations on how to streamline the development approval process and make things move a little bit more quickly. And we're going to ensure that the new bylaws reflect modern land uses and best practices. So why is this important? And people ask me this as a city planner all the time. Why is planning important? Well, this project in particular addresses zoning inconsistencies throughout the municipality that arose from the 2015 amalgamation. It's going to result in a simpler, less bureaucratic process, less time and cost for the applicant, as well as for the planning district. The new zoning bylaw has more clarity and plain language for the applicant and the general public, and that results in improved understanding of the issues. We try and get rid of jargon and language that only planners and government officials use. It makes it faster and simpler for administration to process and easier for council to apply and to explain. In theory, what we'll end up with is better, faster outcomes, and the ultimate goal is a more sustainable community, financially, environmentally, culturally sustainable. So a little bit of a background on Planning 101. What can a zoning bylaw do and what can it not do? So there's basically, well, there's two or three big parts, major parts to development approval process in your municipality. There's the development plan. That's the top of the pyramid there. Pardon me, it's actually the second below the Planning Act, the provincial legislation. But the development plan sets out goals for what you want your municipality to work towards, broad and general goals. And it also enables rules for how a zoning bylaw or a secondary plan bylaw is going to work. And the zoning bylaw has to be generally consistent with senior plans, such as your development plan and any secondary plans. And all of those have to be consistent with the Provincial Planning Act. A zoning bylaw reflects, if a development plan talks about sort of high-level goals and aspirations, like vision statements for a community, a zoning bylaw talks about what is on the ground today, the current uses. It sets out clear rules and regulations about what can and can't be done on the land, and it gives physical descriptions of how that's going to play out. Like it establishes the uses, the setbacks, parking requirements, building heights, size of sheds, things like that. Physical ways of managing the development in your community. So what a zoning bylaw has to do is it must divide the municipality into zones, such as residential, commercial, industrial, parks, and open space, that sort of thing. It will prescribe the permitted and conditional uses of land and building in each zone. It will prescribe the general development standards that are applicable in each zone. And it establishes a system of development permits and procedures for the local approval of development. So it basically sets out the framework, the ground rules for how land is developed in your municipality. So here's a bit of a hierarchy. This is the community planning pyramid. So at the top, you have the provincial regulation, the Planning Act, and everything has to conform to that. And that's established by the province. The development plan is approved by the province. So the next time you go about approving your development plan, it has to go to the province for approval to make sure that's consistent with the Planning Act, with the law of the land. Below that are your secondary plans, your zoning bylaws, your building bylaws, and specific tools like subdivision plans and development agreements. And those are all approved by the municipality, or in your case, by the planning district. So a few of the key changes in the new provincial planning template that we incorporated into your bylaw include, and this is an overview of the maps. There's 17 maps for the municipality of Rhineland. So we're not going to go through them all tonight. They will be posted on the website along with this presentation and the draft bylaw in the next couple of days. And it'll be a little bit easier to view yourself online if that's how you'd like to get more information. And then you can ask a question of Susan or myself through email or phone, whatever is most convenient. So the first step we went through was to look at all the different zones in the 3 municipalities and see where there was some overlap and try and pare them down a little bit so there wasn't as much overlap and so it was easier to administer. So what we have now, there was probably up to 15 different zones that we considered, and it's been streamlined to, I think it's 9, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 or 10 zones. A couple of residential zones, a couple of agricultural zones, zones for agro-industrial, education and institution, parks and open space. So a number of zones that are a lot of similarities, but slightly different to reflect the use of the land and how you want to be used going forward. There are new standards for bed and breakfasts in the municipality, for home-based businesses and home industries. The intent is to try and be a little bit more permissive about what kind of industries can happen on your property and what kind of businesses you can run out of your home. Because in the past, zoning bylaws were very restrictive. You would live in your home and you would work in your business. And that's not necessarily the reality or what we want to encourage. So there's new standards for that. There's new standards for apiaries, community gardens, and urban farms, wind and solar collectors that are getting quite popular and common, and secondary suites. And a secondary suite is sometimes referred to as a granny flat. Sometimes it's a standalone building, or sometimes it's a separate self-contained suite right in the main building, right in the house itself. So there's new standards for that because they're getting quite popular and common as well. There are new development standards for areas that are subject to flood risk, minimum parking standards, shipping containers, because shipping containers are getting to be a fairly common use in many municipalities. Portable garages in particular that come under the broader category of temporary structures, and planned unit developments, which are larger developments that are completely planned, like maybe up to 5 acres. It depends, every municipality is different, but a larger scale development that is planned as a single entity. There are also, so some of the key changes that the standards are directing. The agriculture general minimum parcel size is changing from 40 acres to 80 acres. The agriculture restricted minimum parcel size remains at 40 acres. There are new allotments for animal units in the villages and the clusters. In a residential zone, 2-family dwellings are now permitted on a property. There are new regulations for signage and for fence and tree planting, and also for accessory building structures and setbacks. So the next steps are to go to the, if you want a little bit more information after tonight, you can go to the RM of Rhineland's website to view the presentation, the maps, and the bylaw itself. If there's any revisions that are necessary after the presentation tonight, we'll complete those revisions. And the intent, the goal is that we have first reading on June 23rd. We'll follow it up with a few more revisions if they're necessary. And then the second reading and the public hearing is tentatively scheduled for August 11th. And those are all subject to change, of course, depending on how things go tonight and in general. So that's the presentation for the zoning bylaw. Wanted to try and highlight the intent and the changes. If anybody has any questions now, we have until 8 o'clock to try and go through them. I'm happy to answer general questions about the zoning bylaw itself, or if you have any specific questions about your property, how it might be affected, we can do that as well. It's all public information, so there's nothing private about what happens about the zoning, about the different zoning guidelines for each person's property. So Susan, I'll turn it back over to you, or maybe, pardon me, maybe Don is hosting. I'm not sure, or maybe I can just sit and wait for a question or two.
Sure. So we have our first question here. It's, do I
Okay.
need a permit for a well? So I'm gonna give that question here to Mike. Wells are currently, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, it's Mike Grample here. So do you need a permit for a well? Yes, you will need to get a license from Manitoba Sustainable Development to drill a well on your property. The applications are online. Most of the wells in Rhineland, except kind of in our southwest corner, haven't been very successful, but you are certainly welcome to try. Most of the time, we recommend that they contact a driller to see other wells that may have been dug in the area, and there's often maps on the provincial websites too about wells that have been drilled before.
Can I follow up on that? Mike, do you need a development permit for a well?
Not from our perspective, no.
No.
No. So the permit that you're talking about is outside of the zoning bylaw.
Mhm.
There's no requirements in the zoning bylaw for a.
That's right. You would need a license or a permit from Sustainable Development in the provincial department.
Okay, second question. When do we expect these changes to come into force?
It's, if it goes according to our proposed schedule with the second reading and the public hearing on August 11th, I believe it goes into force immediately upon passing that evening, right after the meeting, so August 11th. So a couple of months for review.
Another question here. What changes are planned for storage containers? So there are some changes to storage containers. We will not be permitting them in the residential low density zones, which is places like Plumcoulee, Gretna, and Rosenfeld. They will be allowed in the country, and they will be allowed in commercial sites.
Shipping containers you're talking about,
Yes,
right?
shipping
storage,
containers.
yeah, okay.
There's a question we get quite often. It's, how do I know if I need a building permit? The easy answer is you call in and you ask if you need a building permit. Most things do need a building permit. Any buildings over 107 square feet will require a permit after this bylaw is passed. You don't need a permit for things like a fence or a deck if it's under 24 inches off the ground or detached from the house. However, it's always best to check with us first just to make sure. Just gonna reiterate here with Jeff what he said before. One of the reasons for doing this bylaw was because Rhineland currently has 3 bylaws that we're managing: the old Gretna bylaw, the old Plumcoulee bylaw, and the old Rhineland bylaw. And so it makes it very difficult sometimes for people to understand that if I'm in an urban center such as Gretna, why are my rules for a fence different than if I live in Rosenfeld, or different than if I live in Plumcoulee? We changed some items in some of the villages and to make them a little more similar. We cut down the amount of types of zones we had there. We had too many zones, I feel. That was another issue that we changed. And one of the bigger issues that we came up with was currently our bylaw allows farmland to be split into 40-acre parcels. And in the future, if this bylaw goes through as proposed, you would only be able to do that in the zone that's agriculture restricted, which is typically the zone around urban centers, and for the purpose of livestock operations. So that is a change that is in our bylaw. I have a question here from Jeff Rempel. Will shipping containers still be allowed in villages? So currently in the bylaw, yes, it is proposed that they would still be allowed in the villages. You still have to meet all the setbacks of accessory buildings. So if your setbacks would be 5 feet from the side yard and 5 feet from the rear for a shed, it would be the same for a shipping container. Heather Unger has a question regarding solar. Can you be specific changes with solar? Solar is permitted. We basically consider it a secondary use. In most cases, it can be on top of a building, it can be in addition to a building, or let's say you have farmland and you want to do solar panels, that would be considered an accessory, so you would just have to meet the accessory setbacks.
That's right, exactly. Same height restrictions, same yard setbacks as any other structure. It's treated like a structure. And there's all these guidelines are in the bylaw itself, and it's pretty straightforward. We won't go through all the details right now, but when you have a chance, go to the bylaw and download it. In the table of contents, you'll see listings for solar collectors, for shipping containers. Another thing about shipping containers is that you can't you have to be careful that some people like to stack them. You have to be careful that you're not going over the height restriction if you put a couple in them. Some people convert them into housing units, residential units. And if you're going to do that, you have to meet the building code as a residential unit. It's not just a shipping container. It's the same code requirements as any other living quarters would be.
Mm-hmm. One other big change I would probably say that we are doing is beforehand in our urban centers, such as Plum Coulee, Gretna, and Rosenfeld, all of the zones there in all three bylaws typically did not allow for duplexes or multi-units. Now lots will be permitted to do 2-family dwellings or duplexes as long as they meet the minimum site requirements. If they don't meet the site requirement, then they would have to get a variation or council could deny that application. Clint Clausen has a question. What is the planned setback for a tree line or hedges? So it's very different in different zones. In the urban centers, it's generally 3 feet from the property line. Unless you're on a corner lot, then it's 10 feet. That's just to keep sight lines at stop signs and intersections. In the rural, it's generally, in the villages, it's 10 feet from your front property line, and it's 5 feet from the side property lines. And when you get to being in beyond a village out in the rural, it depends. If you're at an uncontrolled intersection, from the center of the intersection out, it's 150 feet. And in the front yard, it's 25 feet from the property line. And from the sides, I believe it's going to be 5 is what we're proposing.
And it's important to note as well that that would apply for your plantings going forward. It wouldn't mean that all the existing trees have to be removed or anything like that. It just it's just for new trees going forward. Existing trees are just fine. In addition to the visibility, it just makes it a little bit easier to manage fences when quite often trees are planted right on the property line, and sometimes they're enjoyed by one but not by both, or they obstruct a fence and just having a little bit of separation, but on the property line, like 3 feet is just enough to make sure that you can have your fence without any encumbrances on it.
And I'm just gonna get Mike to address one more item here. Mike, if you just wanna maybe address the difference between conforming and non-conforming and how this new bylaw is going to address that with properties that would change. For example, if they were 40 acres before and then they would want to expand their business, but they are worried because we've changed the bylaw. Can you maybe touch on that?
Sure, that wouldn't be a problem. So in the legislation right now, if the zoning bylaw is changed and your property becomes non-conforming, you're allowed to continue to operate it, but you're not allowed to expand it or grow it in its current location. In this bylaw, we have negotiated with the province, and the province has allowed us to make an exception to that. Particularly, this would affect livestock operations on 40 acres. Those livestock operations would be considered non-conforming, but they would be allowed to expand or change on those 40 acres under the current bylaw. And that's for many businesses. And if you have questions specifically about your operation, be happy to go through it in detail with you.
Any other questions from anyone?
Under the current bylaw. So that's for many businesses. And if you have questions specifically about your operation, be happy to go through it in detail.
Any other questions from anyone?
Whoever's watching it online should.
Yeah, I'm getting.
Or maybe Susan, that's it.
So Susan, what are you trying to, yeah, you have to ask the question 3 times?
Yes,
Yeah,
I think it's because I hear you there and I hear you here, so.
yeah. I think the other comment that what I said initially, the other reason for doing all this is not only do we got to clean up our own bylaws and try to harmonize them, but we also, because we're a planning region with Altona, you've also worked at trying to find as many, things that make sense to put together or leave this, try to coordinate as many things as possible. So that makes the notion of zoning bylaw more transparent and easier to understand. So that's also part of this objective, I think.
Very much so.
All right. I think if that's all the questions we have, then we're going to end this for today. And if anyone has any questions, they can always contact us, myself, Mike Rempel, Don Weeb, or Jeff Palmer, and we can try to answer their questions for specific properties or specific questions. We can go through the bylaw. It's going to be posted on our website as well under notices. And so it will be open until approximately the 18th, where we'll come up with a final draft with any proposed changes from this meeting. And then the next step would be to go to first reading.
I would underline that, Susan. I think it is a good suggestion. Think about this carefully. We want to do this and we want to respect people's opinions. And we also want a chance, if it's not clear why we're doing it, to be able to explain what the thinking is. So yeah, so Susan, I agree with you. If there's a question out there, even if you think it's a minute question, please feel free to ask it and we will respond to that question.
Oh, here we have one question. What is the reason, I'll answer this one yet before we leave. What is the reason for change from 40 to 80 acres? So the biggest reason for the change from 40 to 80 acres was currently the province has provincial land use policies that the planning districts have to follow in their development plan, and then so forth, municipalities need to follow in their zoning bylaws. And currently the province has a provincial land use policy that they want farmland to remain in 80-acre parcels. The reason for that is because it's very difficult to farm smaller parcels, and we see a lot of fragmentation of land in many municipalities. And so the province wants us to maintain that 80-acre parcel minimum in order to allow for larger farming operation and better farming.
That's right, exactly, to comply with the Planning Act and the provincial planning regulation.
Okay, just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And once again, if you have questions, just let us know. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, Susan. Thank you.